The cold air stung my cheeks as I stepped out of the taxi, clutching the thin hospital blanket the nurse had insisted I take with me. My body was still weak, every breath a reminder of the pneumonia that had nearly carried me away. Yet in my mind I had painted this homecoming over and over during the long lonely nights in the hospital ward. I imagined myself walking slowly to the front door, fumbling for my old brass key, and stepping inside to the familiar creak of the wooden floorboards. I could almost smell the faint aroma of roses from the garden, the roses my late husband Robert had planted for me on our 20th wedding anniversary. I thought of sinking into my favourite chair by the window, the one with the worn arms from years of my knitting and reading, and feeling the comfort of home wrap around me like a warm embrace. But instead of comfort, I was met with sounds that didn't belong to me. Children's laughter, shrill and foreign, pierced the air. A dog barked wildly from inside, a deep, aggressive bark I had never heard before, and through the lace curtains, no, not my lace curtains, but heavy, unfamiliar drapes, I saw shadows moving that were not mine. For a brief moment, my heart faltered, and I thought perhaps the illness had muddled my memory, that the taxi had brought me to the wrong street, the wrong door. But no, the red brick steps, the faded number above the door, the crack in the pavement Robert used to curse every time he tripped over it. This was my house, our house. I clutched my purse tighter, suddenly aware of how frail and out of place I looked. My hands trembled as I climbed the steps, each one heavier than the last. I raised my hand to knock, though habit made me reach instinctively for the key in my bag. My fingers brushed against the cool metal, but when I tried it, the lock resisted. It didn't fit anymore. Panic prickled my skin. My key, the key I had carried for over 40 years, was useless. In the door of the house my husband and I had built, brick by brick. With a shaky breath, I knocked. The door opened after a moment, and a young woman stood there, her hair tied back, a dish towel in her hand. She looked at me with polite suspicion, as one looks at a lost stranger. "Can I help you?" she asked. I stared past her, into the hallway I knew so well, the hallway where Robert and I had once carried in our furniture, where my son had taken his first steps, where I had hung family photos along the walls. But the walls were bare now, painted a different colour, and the smell was no longer mine. My throat tightened as I stammered, This is my house." Her expression changed. She straightened, her tone losing its politeness. "No, ma'am," she said firmly, almost as if rehearsed. "This house belongs to us. We bought it last month." My lips trembled, confusion twisting in my chest. Bought it from whom?" I whispered, barely able to form the words. From who?" She hesitated, then said it like a knife to my heart. "From your children." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The world tilted under me, and I had to grip the doorframe to steady myself. My own children, my blood, the very people I had worked my life away to feed, clothe, and educate, had sold the roof over my head while I lay in a hospital bed, fighting for my life. I felt my chest tighten, the doctor's voice echoing in my memory. "No stress, no heavy shocks. You need rest to recover fully. But how does one rest? How does one heal when the very people you love most rob you of the only sanctuary you have left?" Tears blurred my vision as I stepped back, clutching my blanket around me like armor, though it did nothing to shield me from the cold truth. In that moment, something inside me broke. Not just my heart, but my faith, my trust, my very understanding of family. I staggered back from that doorway, my heart pounding, the words "we bought it from your children" echoing like cruel thunder in my head. I turned away before the young woman could say anything else, my legs carrying me unsteadily down the steps as though they no longer remembered how to hold me upright. The taxi had already left, and I stood there in the chilly afternoon, clutching my hospital blanket and staring at the red bricks of the house that was no longer mine. My house, my Robert's house. 40 years of life, love, sacrifice, all erased with a signature on a piece of paper I had never even seen. As I stood there trembling, memories began to flood me, overwhelming and relentless. I remembered the day Robert and I first stepped onto this empty plot of land. We were so young then, our hearts full of dreams, our pockets nearly empty. "It's not much now," Robert had said, looking at the uneven ground and the weeds, "but one day we'll make it ours." And we did, brick by brick, dollar by dollar, sacrifice by sacrifice. Robert worked long shifts at the factory, his back bent and his hands blistered, while I cleaned houses, scrubbed floors, and took in sewing at night. We saved every penny, denying ourselves luxuries, sometimes even meals, just so we could buy one more bag of cement, one more wooden beam, one more piece of the dream. I remembered the day the walls finally went up, rough and unfinished, but strong. I cooked rice and beans on a makeshift stove and carried plates out to the men, helping Robert. We sat on the bare floor of what would become our living room, eating together, laughing despite our exhaustion. "One day, love," Robert whispered to me, that night as we lay on a mattress on the floor, "this house will echo with children's laughter, and we'll grow old watching them play." His words had come true. That house became more than bricks and mortar. It was the vessel of our lives, the container of our joys and sorrows. It was in that kitchen that I learned to stretch a pot of soup to feed not just our family, but neighbours in need. It was in that hallway that my son took his first wobbly steps, his tiny hands reaching out toward me, while Robert clapped proudly. It was on that staircase that my daughter sat crying after her first heartbreak, her teenage shoulders slumped as I stroked her hair and told her she would love again. It was in that garden that Robert planted roses for me every spring, roses that still bloomed faithfully even after he was gone. And it was in that same house that I worked my fingers to the bone for my children's futures. Every extra shift, every skipped meal, every night I stayed up sewing until my eyes burned. It was all for them, for their schooling, for their clothes, for their dreams. I patched their shoes so they wouldn't walk barefoot to school. I sold my jewellery so my son could buy books for college. I ignored my own needs so my daughter could attend dance lessons she begged for. Each sacrifice left a mark, invisible but etched deep into the walls of that house, into the very foundation. And now, standing outside with the wind biting my cheeks, I realized all of that meant nothing to them. The home that had been my temple of sacrifice and memory had been turned into currency, sold to strangers as casually as one sells an old piece of furniture. They hadn't even waited for me to die. They had sold it while I still breathed, while my heart still beat, while I was still fighting for my life. I closed my eyes, and for a moment I thought I could hear Robert's voice, stern but sorrowful. "You gave them everything, Maria, everything, and still they wanted more." A sob escaped my throat, sharp and painful, and I pressed my hand to my chest as though I could hold the pieces of my breaking heart together. I wanted to collapse on those red brick steps, to scream until the world itself shook, but my pride kept me standing. Pride and something else, something that stirred beneath the grief, a seed of anger, of resolve. I don't remember how I made it to the bus stop that day. My body moved, but my mind was adrift, clinging to fragments of the past while trying to grasp the cruel present. Strangers' voices in my home, a barking dog where my roses should have been, the words, "We bought it from your children." Each step I took toward the bus stop felt heavier, like I was walking through mud. People passed by, glancing at me, the old woman clutching a hospital blanket, her eyes swollen with tears. No one knew that I was carrying not just a weakened body, but a shattered life. By the time I reached my daughter's house, the sun had already dipped low, painting the sky in dusky shades of orange and purple. I stood outside her door for a long moment, trembling. This was the daughter I had carried in my womb for 9 months, the girl whose fevers I had nursed, whose broken hearts I had soothed, whose every birthday I had made special with cakes I could barely afford. My hand shook as I raised it to knock. The door opened and there she was, my daughter. Her eyes widened, not with joy but with surprise, almost irritation. "Mom," she said, her voice sharp, "you're supposed to be resting. What are you doing here?" I stepped inside without waiting for her permission, my legs quivering under me. "What have you done?" I whispered, my voice breaking. She frowned, her brow knitting in confusion that felt rehearsed, like she had practiced it. "What are you talking about?" "My house," I said, louder this time, though my throat burned. "Our home, the home your father and I built with our hands, with our lives. I went there today after the hospital, and a woman opened the door. She said you sold it, that you sold my house while I was still alive." For a moment, her eyes flickered, something between guilt and defiance, but then her lips curled into a smile that chilled me to my bones. "Mom, you were sick. You could have died in that hospital. We didn't know if you'd come back. And we needed money. The house was just sitting there. Just sitting there." Her words stabbed at me. That house was not just bricks. It was Robert's laughter, my children's first steps, the very marrow of my life's sacrifices. "Needed money?" I asked, my voice trembling with rage and disbelief. "For what? For rent? For food?" I would have understood if it was survival, but I saw the photos you posted on Facebook, the trips, the shopping bags, the dinners at expensive restaurants, while I lay alone in that hospital bed, struggling for breath. She rolled her eyes as though I were a nuisance, an inconvenience. "Mum, don't be dramatic. We thought it was better this way. You're old. You don't need such a big house anymore. We sold it for your own good. The money is safer with us than tied up in some empty building." My legs nearly gave way beneath me. Safer with them. They had taken the very roof from over my head and dressed it as kindness. My hands clenched the hospital blanket until my knuckles turned white. "Did your brother know?" I asked, my heart already knowing the answer. "Yes," she said flatly, no shame in her voice. "We agreed together. He handled most of the paperwork. It was the practical thing to do. You'll thank us one day. Thank them. Thank them for robbing me of my home, for stripping away the one place where I had hoped to spend the rest of my life in peace, surrounded by the memories of the man I loved and the family I had raised." A scream built in my chest, but no sound came out, only a low sob, raw and broken. She reached out then, not with love, but with impatience. "Mum, sit down. You'll make yourself sick again. We'll explain everything. The money is being put to good use. You don't need to worry about bills or property taxes anymore. Just relax, relax." As if I were a child, too naive to understand the theft of my life. I looked into her eyes, searching for the daughter I once knew, the little girl who clung to my skirt, who whispered, "I love you, Mama," in the dark. But she was gone. In her place was a woman hardened by greed, blind to the devastation she had caused. I stood slowly, my body trembling, but my voice steadier than it had been since the hospital. "You didn't sell a house," I said quietly, my words heavy as stone. "You sold your mother, and you don't even realize what you've lost." I left my daughter's house with legs so weak I thought I might collapse on the sidewalk, but something inside me pushed me forward. The betrayal was like poison coursing through my veins, each step heavy with disbelief. My heart kept whispering, maybe she's lying, maybe she twisted the truth, maybe my son will explain. Because deep down, despite everything, I still clung to the hope that at least one of them, my boy, the child who once wrapped his tiny arms around my neck and swore he'd never leave me, would have stood against this. So I walked, each breath ragged, until I found myself at his door, the house I had helped him buy, paying the down payment when the bank laughed at his empty savings account. I remembered writing that check, my hand shaking because it was almost everything I had left, but my heart steady because I believed I was investing in his future, in his stability, in his happiness. I had thought, if he has a roof of his own, he will always be safe. But as I knocked on his door, my stomach churned with dread, because now I knew the truth. Safety was never part of his plans for me. The door swung open, and there he was, my son, older now, lines on his face, a weariness in his eyes, but not the weariness of honest labour. No, it was the heaviness of a man who carried too many secrets, too many lies. His smile faltered when he saw me, as though my presence was an unwelcome ghost. "Mom," he said quickly, glancing over his shoulder as if afraid someone else might see me. "What are you doing here? You should be resting." That word again, resting. As if I were a fragile object to be put away, hidden while decisions were made over my life. I stepped inside without waiting for him to invite me, the smell of his expensive cologne filling my nose. The gleam of furniture I knew he hadn't paid for himself, glaring in my eyes. My voice shook, but I forced the words out. "Tell me it isn't true. Tell me you didn't sell my house." He sighed, rubbing his face with his hand, and in that moment I saw no trace of the boy who once begged me to bake him chocolate cake on his birthdays, who cried when his father died, who promised to take care of me when I was old. Instead, there stood a stranger, cold and pragmatic. "Mom, listen," he began, his tone rehearsed, practiced, the voice of someone who had already justified his betrayal 100 times in his head. "You were in the hospital. The doctors said you might not make it. We didn't know what would happen, and the bills were piling up. We thought it would be best to sell the house before it lost more value." "Lost value?" I whispered, my chest burning. "That house was my life. It was your father's sweat, my blood, every sacrifice we made so you could have everything you wanted. And you," my voice cracked, "you sold it while I was still breathing, without asking me, without even giving me the chance to say goodbye to my own home." Tears blurred my vision, but he just stood there, his face tightening. "Mum, don't make this harder than it has to be," he said sharply. "You're old. You don't need a big house anymore. You should be in a small place, closer to us, where we can keep an eye on you. The money is safe now. It's better this way." His words, so cold and calculating, sliced through me. Safe. Better. He spoke of my life as if it were a ledger to be balanced, a problem to be solved. I thought of the nights I had skipped dinner so he could eat, the winters I spent with frozen hands because I couldn't afford both heating and his school uniform, the jewellery I pawned so he could buy his first car. All of it, every single sacrifice, had been for him, and now he stood before me, justifying the theft of my very soul. I stepped closer, my frail body trembling, but my eyes locked on his with a fire I hadn't felt in years. "You didn't sell a house," I said, my voice low but steady. "You sold the only place where I still felt my husband's presence. You sold the walls that held your childhood laughter, the kitchen where I taught you to cook, the garden where your father planted roses for me. You sold every memory we built as a family, and you didn't even wait for me to die. You buried me while I was still alive." He looked away then, his jaw tightening, his hands balling into fists. "We did what we had to do," he muttered, and for the first time I saw something flicker in his eyes, shame, but it was buried quickly beneath his stubborn pride. He wouldn't admit it, wouldn't let me see that maybe, just maybe, he knew the magnitude of what he had done. I turned to leave, my heart heavy but my resolve growing. At the door I looked back one last time. "You have taken my home," I said softly, "but you will never take my dignity, and one day you will realize that the money you've gained will never fill the emptiness left by what you've destroyed." Then I stepped out into the cold evening air, the tears running down my cheeks hot against my skin, but somewhere deep inside, beneath the grief, a spark was igniting. They thought they had taken everything from me, but they had underestimated the strength of a mother who has nothing left to lose. That night, I did not sleep. I lay on the narrow cot my neighbour had offered me after I left my son's house, the ceiling above me unfamiliar, the blankets scratchy, but it wasn't discomfort that kept my eyes open. It was the storm raging inside me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Robert's face, smiling as he handed me the keys to our home for the first time. I heard the laughter of my children running through those halls, smelled the bread I used to bake on Sundays, felt the warmth of the fire crackling in the living room we had built with our bare hands. And then, just as quickly, the memories would twist into the cruel present, strangers sitting in my kitchen, curtains I didn't recognize hanging in my windows, and my own children justifying why I no longer belonged in the life I had created. It was like dying twice, once in the hospital, and once again here, at the hands of the people I loved most. But beneath the grief, something else stirred, a question sharp and relentless. What am I now? I'd been a wife, a mother, a keeper of a home that was more than four walls. It was the anchor of my existence. With Robert gone and the house stolen, what remained of me? Was I just an old woman, weak and disposable, waiting for death, while my children circled like vultures? The thought made my chest burn with a heat that felt almost like anger. I had given everything to them. I had denied myself joy, rest, even health, just so they could stand tall in the world. And this was how they repaid me. A mother's love, I realized, had no limit, but a mother's endurance did. I thought of the neighbours who had whispered over the years, warning me in gentle voices that my children had grown spoiled, entitled. I had always defended them, telling anyone who would listen that they didn't understand my children's hearts the way I did. I had shielded them from criticism, from consequence, believing that love alone would guide them back if they ever strayed. But now, sitting in the dark, with tears soaking my pillow, I wondered if I had been blind. Maybe I had raised them too softly, spared them too much, given until they believed giving was my duty, not my choice. They had mistaken my love for weakness, my sacrifices for obligations, and that realization cut deeper than the loss of the house itself. As the hours crawled by, I turned those thoughts over and over until resolve began to form like steel cooling into shape. They thought they had silenced me by taking my home, by pushing me into the shadows of their lives. But they had forgotten something. Everything they had, every opportunity, every comfort, every step forward had come from me, my labour, my sacrifices, my devotion. I was not just a woman without a house. I was their foundation, their past, the reason they even stood where they did. And if they believed they could erase me with a signature, then they had another lesson to learn. The doctor had warned me not to strain myself, not to let stress overwhelm me, but I felt a strange clarity settle over my heart. It was not the frantic panic that had consumed me at the doorstep of my house. It was calm, deliberate, like the steady hands I used to thread needles in the lamplight when I mended their clothes. I knew then that I would not beg them. I would not cry at their feet. I would not scream or curse or fight in a way that would leave me looking small. No, I would rise in the only way I knew how, quietly, firmly, with dignity. I would show them that they had not destroyed me, and in time they would realize the weight of what they had lost. I rose before dawn, my body aching but my spirit steadier than it had been in weeks. I folded the hospital blanket carefully, smoothed my skirt, and looked at myself in the mirror of my neighbour's spare room. The woman staring back was older, lines etched deep by years of struggle, eyes tired from too many nights of tears. But behind the weariness there was still fire, a fire they had forgotten I carried. I touched the mirror softly, as though I could reach through and take the hand of the younger me, the girl who had walked onto that empty plot of land with Robert and dreamed of a house filled with love. I will not let them erase you, I whispered. I will not let them bury me before my time. The next morning, I wrapped a shawl around my shoulders and walked slowly through the streets, my legs still unsteady from illness, but my mind sharper than it had been in months. For the first time since Robert's death, I felt as though he were walking beside me, guiding me with the same steady strength he had always carried. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do, only that I could not sit silently while my children stripped me of everything I had left. For years I had trusted them with blind faith, believing blood was bond enough to protect me. But now I would place my trust elsewhere, where truth, not love, was the currency. I found myself at the office of an old friend, Samuel, a man who had practiced law in our town for decades. His hair had gone white, his frame a little stooped, but his eyes were still sharp, the kind that saw straight through pretenses. When he looked up and saw me standing in his doorway, leaning on the frame as though I might collapse, his face softened. "Maria," he said gently, "you should be resting. What brings you here in this state?" I sat across from him, the weight of my shawl heavy on my shoulders, and poured out the story between tears and trembling hands. I told him about the strangers in my home, about the young woman who had looked at me like a trespasser, about my daughter's cold words and my son's practiced justifications. His brow furrowed deeper with each word, and when I finished, he leaned back in his chair, silent for a long moment. Finally, he said, "Maria, selling a house is not like selling a piece of furniture. There are documents, signatures, titles. If what you're saying is true, your children would have needed your approval unless—" His voice trailed off, and my heart clenched. "Unless what?" I whispered. He looked at me with pity, the kind that cuts deeper than cruelty. "Unless they forged your signature, or unless you unknowingly signed something while you were sick. Medical papers, perhaps, that included clauses you didn't understand." The room tilted around me. Forged, tricked. The thought that my own children might have stolen not just my house, but my very name, my very hand, left me nauseous. Samuel reached across the desk, his old hands warm on mine. "Maria, listen to me. If this is what happened, the law is on your side. It will take time, and it will not be easy, but you are not powerless. They may have thought you were too weak to fight back, but I promise you, you still have rights." His words were like a breath of air in my drowning lungs. For the first time since stepping out of that taxi, I felt the faint stirrings of hope, not because I believed the fight would be easy, but because I realized the story was not over yet. He asked me to leave the details to him for the moment, to let him gather the paperwork from the registry office and investigate what had been filed. I agreed, though my body sagged with exhaustion. As I left his office, the winter air biting at my skin, I felt different, still broken, still betrayed, but no longer powerless. My children thought they had buried me alive, but perhaps they had only awakened something in me I had forgotten. The woman who once scrubbed floors until her hands bled just to buy a bag of cement. The woman who stood beside her husband and built a life from nothing. I had survived poverty. I had survived widowhood. I had survived sickness. I would survive this too. That evening, back at my neighbour's house, I sat by the window and watched the streetlights flicker on one by one. My daughter had not called. My son had not checked on me. Perhaps they believed I had crawled away into some corner to wither and disappear. Let them think that, I thought, pulling the shawl tighter around me. Let them believe I am weak. When the truth comes out, when Samuel places the proof before them, it will not be me who trembles. It will be them. And for the first time in many nights, I felt the corners of my lips twitch upward, not in joy, but in something steadier, stronger, resolve. A week later, Samuel called me back to his office. My hands trembled as I held the receiver, the old landline feeling like a weight in my palm. His voice was firm, clipped, almost urgent. "Maria, I have the papers. Come in." My heart thudded against my chest the entire walk there. every step feeling heavier than the last. When I finally sat down across from him, I braced myself for whatever storm was about to come. He slid a manila folder across the desk and opened it carefully, as though the contents inside were fragile enough to break me in half. My eyes fell on the neat rows of legal print, the embossed stamps, the signatures at the bottom, my name, written in handwriting so similar to mine, it sent a chill crawling up my spine. But Samuel's eyes told me the truth before his mouth did. "This," he said softly, "is not your hand. It's a forgery, sloppy enough that I caught it immediately, but clean enough that a stranger at the registry accepted it. Your children, or someone they paid, signed your life away without your consent." The air left my lungs. My knees pressed together under the desk as though I could hold myself upright against the force of his words. Forged, stolen. My children had not only betrayed me, they had dragged my very name, my very identity, into their crime. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about who I was. Samuel's voice cut through the fog. "Maria, you must understand, this is serious. What they've done is fraud. If you wish, we can challenge this in court. We can bring charges." The word charges echoed in my ears like thunder. These were my children, the babies I had carried, the ones I had rocked to sleep, whose fevers I soothed through endless nights. Could I really stand in a courtroom and watch them answer for what they had done? Could I stomach the sight of my daughter and son in handcuffs, their names stained forever? I shook my head, tears brimming, but Samuel leaned forward, his eyes locking on mine. "Maria, listen to me. This isn't just about punishment. It's about justice. They assumed you would remain silent, that your love for them would chain you. But silence will not bring back your home. Silence will only embolden them to keep taking. You must decide if you want to remain their victim or reclaim your life." His words struck something deep inside me, something I had tried to bury beneath love and loyalty. I thought of Robert, of how fiercely he had protected our family, of how he had taught me never to let anyone take what was rightfully ours. For the first time, I realized that protecting my children did not mean shielding them from the consequences of their own cruelty. Perhaps the lesson they needed most was the one they had never expected me to teach. Later that evening, I called them both. My daughter's voice was brisk, annoyed, as if my call was an interruption in her busy life. My son's tone was colder, defensive, like a man who already suspected the walls were closing in. I told them simply, "We need to meet, tomorrow, at Samuel's office, both of you." There was a pause, silence so long I thought they might refuse, but finally my son muttered, "Fine." I hung up the phone, my hands trembling, but my spirit steady. The next day, when they entered Samuel's office, I did not greet them with tears or pleas. I stood by the window, tall as my frail body would allow, my hands clasped tightly around the shawl draped over my shoulders. Samuel spread the documents across the desk. My daughter's face drained of colour. My son's jaw tightened, his fists clenching at his sides. "This," Samuel said firmly, tapping the papers, "is fraud, a crime punishable by prison. Maria has every right to press charges, and if she does, you will both answer for this in court." The silence that followed was deafening. My daughter's lips quivered as though words were stuck in her throat. My son stared at the floor, his mask of indifference cracking for the first time. I stepped forward then, my voice calm, steady, stronger than I had ever heard it in my own ears. "You sold my home. You tried to erase me from the very walls that raised you. But you will not erase my dignity. You will not bury me alive. The choice is now yours. Make this right or live with the consequences." Their eyes darted to each other, panic flickering like trapped birds. For once they had no clever excuses, no cruel dismissals, no smug superiority. For the first time, it was not I who was trembling. It was them. The silence in Samuel's office was so thick it pressed against my chest. My daughter finally broke it, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and defiance. "Mom, you don't understand. We only did it because we thought you weren't coming back. We panicked. Her words stumbled, collapsing under the weight of their own hollowness. I stared at her, the girl I had once held to my breast, who used to cry if I left the room for even a moment. Now she stood before me, justifying the theft of my life as though it were an oversight, a miscalculation instead of the deliberate betrayal it was. Samuel cut in sharply, his voice like a blade. "Enough! You both knew what you were doing. You forged your mother's signature. You lied to the registry. This wasn't panic. It was greed." My son's fists unclenched, his bravado slipping as he finally lifted his eyes to mine. There was no warmth there, only the tight desperation of a man cornered. "Mum, please," he muttered, the edge in his voice now softened by something almost resembling fear. "Don't ruin us. Think about what this will do. Prison, our reputations, we're your children. You couldn't." His words trailed off as my silence stretched. He had counted on my love to shield him, to cover him like it always had, but what he saw in my eyes now was not the mother who had always forgiven, always excused, always sacrificed. What he saw was the woman who had built a life from nothing, who had bled and sweated and cried to hold her family together, and who had finally realized her children had taken not only her love, but her dignity for granted. "I wouldn't ruin you," I repeated slowly, my voice carrying a weight that made my daughter flinch. "You ruined me. You took the one thing I had left of your father, the one place I could still feel his presence. You ripped away my sanctuary while I was lying in a hospital bed, gasping for breath, and now you stand here and ask me not to ruin you." My voice rose then, steadier than it had been in years, strong enough to echo through Samuel's office. "You've ruined yourselves, and if the law decides that you must pay for what you have done, then so be it." Samuel leaned forward, his pen tapping against the papers. "Maria has two choices," he said firmly. "She can press criminal charges, or she can pursue a civil case to reclaim what is rightfully hers. Either way, the law will not look kindly on this. I suggest you both think carefully before assuming she will let you walk away untouched." Their faces paled, panic flooding them. My daughter broke down first, her hands clutching her face as tears spilled through her fingers. "Mum, I'm sorry," she sobbed, her voice choked. "We thought it was the best thing. We thought we'd use the money to take care of you later. I swear it wasn't meant to hurt you like this." Her words might have once softened me, but now they sounded like hollow echoes of excuses she'd told herself to sleep at night. My son remained stiff, his jaw clenched, but even he could no longer meet my gaze. I stood slowly, my shawl slipping from my shoulders, and walked toward the door. My hand lingered on the frame as I turned back to them. "You will never again speak of what is best for me," I said quietly, each word carved with steel. "You lost the right to decide my future the moment you sold my past. If you wish to make amends, you will return what you have stolen. If not, the law will decide for you. Either way, I will not be silenced. Not this time." With that, I left them in Samuel's office, their faces pale, their shoulders hunched, their confidence shattered. For the first time in years, I walked into the cold afternoon air with my back straight, my breath steady, and the faintest glimmer of something I thought I had lost forever: power. In the days that followed that meeting at Samuel's office, the air between my children and me grew thick with silence. They did not call, did not come to see me, and for once I did not chase after them. I'd spent a lifetime running to their aid, soothing their wounds, covering their mistakes, carrying their burdens on my weary back. But now I sat in stillness and let them sit with what they had done. Samuel moved forward with the papers, filing what needed to be filed, and in time the law began to stir. Letters arrived at their homes, demanding responses. I heard from neighbours that their friends, once so quick to flock to their dinner tables and trips, had begun to pull away, whispers circulating of what they had done. Greed has a way of rotting the very soil it tries to take root in, and already I saw their lives begin to unravel. One evening my daughter appeared at my neighbour's door, her eyes red, her hands trembling as she held them together like a child in prayer. "Mom," she whispered when I opened the door, her voice cracking, "please forgive me. We were foolish. We were selfish. We thought only of ourselves, and we forgot everything you've done for us. I don't know what came over us. For a moment I simply looked at her, remembering the little girl she had once been, the child who used to cling to my skirt and beg me not to let go. Part of me wanted to pull her into my arms, to pretend none of this had happened, but another part, the part that had been shattered and rebuilt in fire, held steady. Forgiveness, I said softly, is not a word you beg for when you've been caught. It is a gift you earn through change. Show me you are sorry, not with words, but with the life you live from here forward. Then perhaps I will believe you." My son came weeks later, not with tears, but with a quiet heaviness in his eyes. He did not beg, did not excuse. He simply placed an envelope on the table before me, thick with documents Samuel later confirmed were the deeds and papers required to restore what could be restored. His voice was low, hoarse, as though every word scraped his throat. "I was wrong, Mama," he said, and for the first time since Robert's funeral, I saw not a man, but the boy he had once been. I lost sight of who I was, of who you made me. I don't deserve your love any more. I looked at him for a long time, the weight of years pressing between us. "Love," I said finally, "is not something you can deserve or not deserve. It is given, and I gave it to you long before you betrayed me, but respect that you must earn. And until you learn that, love alone will not save you." He nodded, eyes downcast, and left without another word. The house was never mine again in the way it had been before. Even when the legal papers settled and Samuel told me the title was back in my name, I knew something had changed. The walls would never feel the same. The air would never be as sweet. The roses in the garden never as fragrant. Because innocence, once shattered, cannot be pieced together as it was. But I returned anyway. I sat once more in my favourite chair by the window, the one Robert had helped carry into the house decades ago, and I breathed in the silence. It was not the silence of betrayal anymore. It was the silence of survival, of dignity reclaimed, of a woman who had lost everything and yet still stood. Sometimes when the nights are long and my body aches from age, I think of Robert and whisper into the dark, "I did not disappear, my love. They tried, but I did not vanish." I stood my ground, and in the stillness I almost feel him there, beside me, his hand warm against mine, proud of the strength I had finally found. My children visit sometimes, awkwardly, their eyes filled with guilt and longing. I do not shut the door on them, but neither do I let them walk through as easily as they once did. They must earn their place again, step by step, action by action, because I have learned something in this fire. A mother's love is endless, but a mother's dignity is priceless. And if I must choose, I will choose dignity, always.